G'day, I'm Cahn, and in this video, I'm going to run this house panel from Bunnings on a four-wheel drive setup to see how it performs, compare it to a typical 12-volt solar panel, and see if it's a genuinely viable option or whether it's just more work for not a whole lot of gain. This panel only costs $121 from Bunnings, and on paper, it puts out a lot more power than a typical four-wheel drive or camping solar setup. So if this works, it could be a really cost-effective way to get heaps of power. But if it doesn't, I'll tell you exactly why. And there's one more thing I should flag right up front. I can't really test durability on a panel like this in a single test or a single video. So I'm going to keep using it over the next weeks and months and report back on how it does. Because I figure house panels are designed to be fixed in place on your roof, not bouncing down corrugated roads. But if you've used a house panel and it's doing well on your setup, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear some more real-world experience. So first things first, let's talk about the panels I'll be testing. First, we have this solar panel from Bunnings that outputs 440 watts. First impressions are it's big. It's roughly 1.1 meters wide and around 1.8 meters long. It also weighs 22 kilos, so it's not the sort of thing you just throw up on your roof rack and hope for the best. Electrically, it's a little bit different to your typical 12-volt solar panels as well, because this outputs its maximum power around 30 volts and 14.8 amps. That's where you get that 440 watts figure from. And its maximum voltage is around 35 volts, which is a lot higher than a typical camping panel. And that means you can't just use any old regulator or DC-DC charger. To compare it fairly, I'm also testing two of these 200 watt panels combined. Now these output 18.83 volts at 10.65 amps. That's where you get your 200 watts from, and I've got two of them for 400 watts total. Overall, these ones measure about 875 wide and 1275 long. So when you have two of them combined, it's actually slightly wider and about the same length as a single house panel. One nice thing about the 12-volt panels compared to the house panel is just the lower profile. These are about 20 mil, whereas the house panel is 30 mil. Now for a cost comparison, the Bunnings 440 watt panel costs $121. So that's around 28 cents per watt. The two 200 watt 12 volt nominal panels cost me $99 each, so it works out to around 50 cents per watt. Now to be fair, I did want to get 4 of the 110 watt panels to perfectly match the output of this one, but they didn't have any in stock. They were a little bit cheaper and would have worked out to be about 45 cents per watt. So we're going to use that for a fair comparison. The other thing to think about is when you have this much potential charging current, you might need to uprate to a higher powered regulator. So you've got to factor that cost in as well. And particularly with a higher voltage solar panel, you probably will need a more expensive regulator, so that might add to the cost. So to demonstrate the test setup I've got here, identical batteries, both 60 amp hours, and they've come out of a setup where they're in parallel, which means they're at the same state of charge. They're down around 10%, which is good because they'll accept a lot of charge, and that means that's not really a factor. That's not going to slow down the charging. I've then run wiring through a Victron Smart Shunt so that I can measure exactly what's coming into the battery. That goes to an MPPT regulator. Now this is an XTM brand. I have two identical ones. They're basically a rebranded EPEVA Tracer 4210. That means they can accept up to 100 volts input and charge up to 40 amps output. That's around 520 watts coming out of this at 13 volts into the battery. So there's plenty of overhead and that won't be a limiting factor. Then I've got the same length of wire running to a watt meter, so I can actually see what's coming directly out of the panel before any voltage drop. And then that's going to plug into either the two 200 watt panels in parallel or the single house panel. So let's set it up and get into it. One more quick thing to mention, because I've got the two 12 volt panels in parallel, I obviously had to get a 2-into-1 Anderson style connector. For the house panel, I've got an MC4 to Anderson style. As you might be able to see, the sun keeps going behind clouds, which is perfect. This is a real world test after all. I've laid everything out, everything's identical, I just haven't plugged it in yet. I'm giving it 5 minutes so everything comes up to temp so it's all fair. Then I'm going to plug it in, leave it running for an hour, and we'll see what we get on those smart shunts. Let's go. Let's give it an hour. So it's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to take a quick look at all the specs and list them off. So this setup is currently charging at 26 amps, 348 watts of power, 13.35 volts, 353 watts thereabouts. And the other setup, oops, sun's about to go, 13.45 volts, 30.89 amps. I grabbed both devices now so I can actually compare at the same time. At the moment, the sun's behind a cloud and it's fairly dark, but as a comparison, I'm getting 130 watts from the house panel and 108 watts from the two 12-volt panels. So it's been about half an hour, currently getting 438 watts from the house panel, and we're getting 377 watts from the 12-volt panel just before that sun disappeared again. There's about 20 minutes left in this 1 hour test, and I just wanted to quickly talk about the fact that I've wired these two panels in parallel. That basically means that both the panels stay the same voltage. Combined, they're at about 18, 19 volts, but it doubles the current up to about 21 amps, and that's where you get that 400 watts. Very different to the higher voltage setup that the house panel's doing. So what I'm also gonna do is run this for half an hour in series. That is, it'll get double the voltage, but still 11 amps or so. And that way it's gonna be an apples for apples comparison and we can see how they work. Now that's important because I'm running MPPT regulators. That stands for maximum power point tracking. MPPT regulators work by finding the highest or maximum power point on a curve where it combines the voltage and the current of the panel. So it might be 30 volts, 14.8 amps. That's the maximum this panel can output. So the MPPT is trying to keep it at that point. As the sun changes or goes behind a cloud, those numbers vary. And that's where a higher voltage is really important because MPPTs typically only work if you've got a couple of volts higher than the battery voltage. So if these panels are dropping down to say 15 volts and the battery's up above 13 volts, it's not actually going to be effectively working as an MPPT. It'll be more like a passive charger or similar to a PWM. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. It's now coming up on an hour, so I'm going to disconnect this and rewire these two panels into series. And it's about time too, because that shadow over here has just been creeping closer and closer to these panels. So I'm going to reposition, make sure it's all getting full sun, reconnect this, and we'll go for another half hour. 35 and 11 amps. And this one is 28 volts and 15 amps. "36 volts, 2.3 amps, 26 volts, 4.4 amps. Currently getting 320 watts from the 12-volt panels, 351 watts from the house panel. So I spent a few hours going over all the numbers and here's what it looks like. Both setups did really well. Considering it was a really hot day with varying cloud cover and that these numbers are taken from the shunt, so it's after any voltage drop and efficiency losses in the regulator. For the first test over an hour, the house panel output around 227 watt hours, whereas the two 200 watt panels did around 180 watt hours. So the house panel offered about 26% more output in the same time and conditions. Remember that the house panel has about a 40 watt advantage though. So if we factor that in, the difference is only about 16% between the two setups. When I put them into series, the overall difference was around 13%. So again, factoring in that 10% power difference, it's really more like 3%. Now looking at a graph of output over time, in both tests, the 440 watt panel did have a higher maximum. 430 watts versus 372 watts in test 1, and then 382 watts versus 346 watts in test 2. The sun was a little lower in the sky by then, which probably accounts for that lower maximum output. Taking the 10% difference into account, the house panel had about 5% better output in test 1, and it was about the same in test 2. But you can see that the house panel has higher peaks and better lows. It's the same story in the series test, but again, that's only due to actual power difference. So my final thoughts. If you want to install solar on a caravan, camper trailer, even a roof rack or rooftop tent, and you have the space, house panels are a seriously cost-effective option. Just remember that you probably will need a regulator that's capable of running at a higher voltage, so that's going to eat into a little bit of that cost savings. I probably paid about $70 more than I would have had to if I was just running 12 volt panels. If you're doing serious off-road touring or wheeling, then it would probably come down to how you mount and protect your panel. But overall, it's pretty impressive. The only other question I'd ask yourself is whether you need 400 watts of solar. And if the answer is yes, these are a great option. But most people and most setups would probably be able to get away with 200 watts worth of solar if you're using a DC-DC charger, because that way you can charge while you're driving and then get sun when you have it. And as I said at the start of the video, there is that question about whether a house panel can handle corrugations. These do have a 25-year materials warranty, but I'm going to assume that's if they're fixed to the roof of your house, not bouncing down a road. So I don't know how they go if they're flexing off-road or bouncing up and down. If you have real-world experience, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to install this one on a setup and run it for the next couple of weeks or months and see how it actually goes in the real world. Cheers, guys. I'll see you in the next one.